For over 3 decades, India has faced a persistent campaign of state-sponsored terrorism from across its border. Organizations like Lashkar-e-Taiba and Jaish-e-Mohammed have operated as proxy extensions of the Pakistani intelligence apparatus. Following the 2008 Mumbai attacks, India's initial response relied heavily on diplomacy and presenting evidence to the global community. When proxy groups targeted military bases at Uri in 2016 and a security convoy at Pulwama in 2019, the response shifted to kinetic retaliation, with Indian forces launching surgical strikes against terrorist camps. Yet these isolated retaliations left the broader operational infrastructure intact. Proxy forces retreated temporarily, only to regroup and utilize the exact same cross-border networks to plan future assaults. On April 22, 2025, heavily armed terrorists attacked Pahalgam. Claimed by the Resistance Front, a proxy of Lashkar-e-Taiba, the assault deliberately targeted the peace and economic development that had been building in Jammu and Kashmir since the abrogation of Article 370. Indian leadership faced a very specific problem. They needed to permanently dismantle entrenched, state-backed terror networks hiding deep within a neighboring country, but they had to execute this destruction without triggering an uncontrolled conventional or nuclear war. The solution was Operation Sindoor. Instead of isolated reactive strikes, the Indian armed forces executed a highly calibrated multi-domain strategy that allowed them to dictate the exact boundaries, intensity, and timing of the engagement. Before any weapons were fired, the operation began in the digital and orbital domains. During this initial phase, cyber units tapped into Pakistan's critical networks, while the Indian Space Research Organization repositioned its satellites, giving intelligence agencies a real-time view of enemy infrastructure. This map shows the exact boundaries of the opening kinetic strike. At 0105 hours, Indian forces hit 9 specific terror targets across Pakistan-occupied Kashmir and mainland Pakistan. The entire strike lasted exactly 22 minutes, restricting collateral damage by avoiding civilian areas. To execute these deep, precision strikes, the military deployed indigenously manufactured hardware, relying on systems like the BrahMos and Akash missiles. Simultaneously, the Indian Navy pre-deployed its carrier battle group and stealth submarines into the northern Arabian Sea, establishing an immediate blockade posture off the coast. By synchronizing precise strikes on land with an overwhelming naval presence at sea, India systematically dismantled the terrorist staging grounds while presenting the Pakistani military with a controlled scenario that made counterattacking highly unfavorable. Pakistan retaliated with indiscriminate cross-border firing targeting local populations, coupled with a series of uncoordinated drone infiltrations into Indian airspace and a rapid misinformation campaign claiming civilian casualties. India's response relied on an integrated air defense grid stretching from Kashmir to Gujarat. The system tracked the incoming drones and artillery, allowing counter-unmanned aerial systems to neutralize the aerial threats. Crucially, the Indian Defense Forces effectively utilized the S-400 surface-to-air missile system. The active radar homing capabilities of these platforms successfully locked onto and destroyed enemy aircraft at ranges exceeding 300 kilometers. Because the defense grid absorbed the retaliation without sustaining critical damage to Indian military infrastructure or civilian centers, the pressure to escalate or concede fell squarely back on the opposing command. At this stage, Indian intelligence agencies intercepted communications revealing that Pakistan was actively preparing its own conventional military counteroffensives, designated Operation Bunyan and Operation Marsis. This schematic illustrates India's immediate countermaneuver. The Indian Air Force specifically targeted Pakistani air defense sites and early warning radars. By destroying these arrays, they blinded the adversary's surveillance capabilities and carved out resistance-free corridors in the airspace. Using these cleared flight paths, Indian jets pushed deep into enemy territory to execute preemptive strikes on airbases, including Noor Khan, Sargodha, and Jacobabad. May's strikes neutralized high-value strategic assets on the tarmac. A large number of fighter jets, heavy transport aircraft, unmanned aerial vehicles, and airborne early warning aircraft were destroyed before they could be deployed. With its surveillance grid offline and its deep air bases heavily damaged, Pakistan physically lost the capacity to launch Operations Bunyan and Marsis. India had forced a complete collapse of the adversary's offensive options. The battlefield assessment was clear. Pakistan's radar networks were heavily degraded, multiple deep air bases were offline, and their central command mechanism was struggling to process the ongoing strikes. At sea, Indian naval stealth destroyers and frigates were holding aggressive positions, fully prepared to strike targets along the Makran coast and Karachi. Facing imminent naval bombardment and severely compromised airspace, the Pakistani Military Operations Directorate initiated a call to their Indian counterparts. Both sides agreed to a total cessation of hostilities across land, sea, and air, effective at 1700 hours on May 10th. By controlling the tempo of the engagement across all domains, blinding the enemy from the air while trapping them from the sea, India determined exactly when and how the conflict ended. The execution of Operation Sindoor proved that seamless, tri-service synergy is highly effective in active combat. The Army, Navy, Air Force, and intelligence wings operated as a single, cohesive entity. This operation also relied intensely on domestic manufacturing. Utilizing indigenous missile platforms, advanced radar arrays, and communication hardware ensured that India maintained complete strategic autonomy over its weapon systems throughout the crisis. By calculating the precise threshold of retaliation, India dismantled the long-standing threat of nuclear escalation. Operation Sindoor proved that state-sponsored terror can be met with overwhelming, precise force.
If you value clarity over chaos, explore more on Clear Lens X.